everyone, it's Alice, and today, in honor of spooky season, let's talk about some ghost books. I actually thought that I had already done one of these videos, but I haven't, so it's about time. Now, you may know that I'm not a huge horror reader, and I don't like when things get too scary, so the books that I have are like, I mean, some of them do get a little bit scary, but most of them are at like a manageable level. And I think if you want like really, really scary ghost books, these aren't the ones. But if you want just like a manageable level of spooky, I have some books for you. Also, having gathered up the books for this video, it occurs to me that I actually haven't read as many ghost books as I thought I had, and I really like them, so I should be reading more of them. But I do have quite a lot of books to show you that I really liked and would like to recommend. And then I have like a little stack of books at the end of like ghost books on my TBR that I'm looking forward to reading. I want to show you those as well. And we have a nice little mix of all kinds of things, some historical fiction, some classics, some graphic novels, just a little bit of everything. Maybe we should start with the graphic novels actually. I have these two, and they could not be like more different from one another, and they do both have ghosts, but they have like completely different vibes. The first one is Sheets by Brenna, Thummler, and this follows a 13-year-old girl who is basically in charge of the family's like laundry business, and she meets this ghost one day when he sort of like tumbles into the human world. This is very sweet and heartwarming, and the artwork is lovely. It is geared towards a slightly younger audience, but I still really enjoyed it. I really liked meeting the characters and following this teenager, and also meeting Wendell, who is the little ghost. It's very sweet, and it's the kind of book that will like tug at your heartstring. The second one is not as sweet and heartwarming. It's Through the Woods by Emily Carroll, which just looking at the cover and like looking at some of the art, you can tell that this is a completely different kind of book. It's much darker and much bloodier, I guess. This is also short stories, so we have 5 stories in here that are all illustrated in this pretty creepy style. And I remember one story in particular in here that is pretty, like, it freaked me out a little bit. But I would say that this is chilling. I think that's the perfect word for it. And when I read this the first time, I've read it several times since then, but the first time that I read it pretty late at night, and it was kind of dark, and it did give me a fright, but it was like the perfect amount of fright, if that makes sense. It's a really, really good book, and perfect for fall. Like, it's perfect for spooky season. Speaking of short stories, I have a couple of more recommendations for that, both of which are classics. And at least for me, I really like reading short spooky stories because I can't deal with too much horror, and it just feels like a bite-sized piece of something. And you can get that sort of spooky feeling without it being too much. The first one is Ghostly Tales, Spine-Chilling Stories from the Victorian Age. And the title of this kind of says it all, but in here we have 7 stories by authors like Elizabeth Gaskell and Arthur Conan Doyle, and I think there's a story by Robert Louis Stevenson. And not all of these stories have straight up ghosts in them, but they all have like a ghostly feeling to them. And if you just want a little bit of a spooky story, like, these are perfect. And none of them are too scary, I would say. The other one I have is this. This is Ghost Stories, and this is one of those Everyman's Collections type books. And this has stories from all kinds of different authors. And the thing is, I did read this a while ago, like it's been several years, and I don't remember that many of like the specific stories. And that's not the book's fault, it's just me who can't remember what I read. But I remember the feeling this book gave me, and it was like the perfect amount of like spooky. I feel like with classics, like I don't think I've ever read a classic ghost story that has really like freaked me out in the way modern ghost stories do. And in here you just get like that ghostly spooky feeling without it being too much. And I remember really enjoying this. I should really reread this because I can't remember like any of the stories, but I do remember the feeling of it being good. Moving on to actual novels though, I have a little stack to show you, and I think what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go from like lightest to darkest, if that makes sense, because some of these are like pretty freaking dark, and I know that not everyone is into that. The first two that I have are actually books by the same author. We have two books by Shirley Jackson. We have Always Lived in the Castle and The Haunting of Hill House. Now, I do know that this isn't like a classic ghost book. It's more of like, it's a ghostly tale. This doesn't have straight up ghosts in it. And I remember when I read it, I thought it would have, but it doesn't. So maybe including this is a little bit like cheating, but I'm just gonna include it because it has that feeling to it, and it's more of like a haunting type of situation, I guess. It's about this family who lives in a crumbling mansion, and we follow this girl who lives there with her sister and her uncle, and they sort of keep to themselves. They do live by this village, but they keep to themselves because this is also a mystery, and the mystery is about what happened when like the rest of the family basically died all in one night. I think the parents, the aunt, and someone else like related to these sisters, they all died of like a poisoning, and the people in the village think that the eldest daughter like did it and got away with murder, and so they sort of just keep to themselves. The only contact that they have with the outside world really is twice a week when our main character leaves the house. Like, the other people don't leave the house, but she leaves the house to go shopping twice a week in the village, and everyone looks at her funny, and it's a whole like weird vibe. And then things sort of take a turn when this cousin shows up, and yeah, it's an interesting story. Again, it's not your typical ghost story. It's much more like haunted people kind of vibes, I think. The Haunting of Hill House is also like haunted house vibes, but this one leans more into actual like paranormal territory. It's about these four people who go to visit this notoriously freaky house, and we have this doctor who is looking for evidence of the occult. We have his assistant. We have this woman who's kind of like haunted herself already, and we have the heir to this house, and they go to stay there, and at the beginning everything seems okay, and then of course things get a little freaky. The haunted house in here was definitely my favorite part of this book, and I just feel like both of these are great if you want like gothic books with like ghostly vibes that aren't too like scary. If you want a character-driven mystery with ghostly vibes, We Have Always Lived in the Castle is great, and then The Haunting of Hill House is great if you want like gothic vibes with actual like paranormal stuff going on. If you want even heavier gothic vibes though, I would recommend Wuthering by Emily Brontë. I just want to say though, this book is super melodramatic and it's really over the top, so I kind of feel like you have to be in the mood for it. But if you want something super gothic and super atmospheric, this is perfect. I'm sure you already know, but this tells the story of this tragic and passionate love affair between these two people, and it's all very like dark and atmospheric and a little disturbing sometimes. The characters in here are also horrible people, so you kind of have to be okay with reading about unlikable characters, but I think if you're in the mood for this, this can be a really, really good read. It is very dramatic, but sometimes you want all of the drama, and this will give it to you. The last three books that I have to show you before we move on to my little TBR are all newer publications, meaning not classics. And the first one that we have here is The Diviners by Libba Bray. This is YA historical fiction fantasy, and it's set in New York in the 1920s, which is an excellent setting. And we're following a main character named Evie, who gets into some trouble in her hometown, and she is sent to live with her uncle in New York. And her uncle has this like weird occult type museum, and he's really into the occult and he does research around it and stuff. And Evie is really excited to get to New York because it's an exciting city and it's a new life for her. And yeah, she's excited to get there, but she also has this secret, which is this like supernatural ability that no one knows about, and she's keeping to herself. But then her uncle is called to the scene of the murder of this girl, and there are these like occult, I think symbols or something, I can't quite remember, but there's like some occult stuff at that murder scene, and so he's called to help, and he brings Evie, and she realizes that maybe she can use this ability of hers to help out, even though so far it's caused her nothing but trouble. Both her and her uncle gets caught up in this like mystery, and it becomes clear throughout this that there's more stuff going on, and there are actually more people around that also have supernatural abilities like our main character, and there's something about all of them that like is emerging. And there's also this there's a lot of stuff going on in this book, but there's also, at the same time as all of this is happening, there's this dark power that has awakened, and we read a little bit about that as well, and it is quite unsettling. Most of this book, though, is just like cool and fun, and that we do have some of these darker elements in it, and I feel like it's a great mix. It's not too like scary because it is YA, although I guess YA can be pretty scary, but this isn't like too bad. But like the chapters with this like awakening force that's happening are pretty unsettling, and it's really cool. It's a cool like world that we get to see in here, and I love all of the supernatural stuff. Then we have a book that thoroughly freaked me out when I read it last year. It's The Silent Companions by Laura Purcell. This is historical fiction, and in it we meet this main character who becomes a widow 3 weeks after she got married, which obviously sucks. And she is sent to live at like the estate of her dead husband, and she's never been there. Like, they didn't have time for that, but she's sent to live there, and she's never been there. She doesn't know anyone, and her only companion is this like weird cousin of her dead husband, and they don't really get along, and it's all very strange, and this whole house is like super creepy and weird. So she's not doing too great, our main character. Then it gets worse when they get to this house, and like the servants are quite rude and a little weird, and the village people will go nowhere near this house. And then they find these wooden companions in the attic, and all of a sudden these wooden companions start just appearing around the house, and no one really knows who put them there. This is really atmospheric, and the buildup of the tension throughout this book is so good. But I will say, this does get quite scary towards the end. And I remember when I got to like the last third, I couldn't stop reading it because in part I wanted to know what was going on, and in part I needed it to be over because I just got really freaked out. And I am a bit of a fragile soul, so, you know, take this with a grain of salt, but this is about as much of like scary things that I can deal with, but it was really good. It did freak me out though. Like, these companion thingies are just really spooky. But I also do feel like this, like the way that this transitions from spooky to scary is like excellently done. Lastly, before we move on to my TBR, we have one of my favorite books. It's Ninth House by Leigh Bardugo. This follows this young woman who survives this horrific tragedy where like multiple people die, and she wakes up in the hospital, and she is approached out of nowhere by this person who offers her a place at Yale University. And she like comes from a pretty rough background. She doesn't have any, like, she hasn't finished high school or anything. But she's offered a place, and she's told that what she needs to do to sort of earn her place is to monitor the secret societies of the school. And let me tell you, they get up to some freaky shiz. Our main character is being trained by the person who currently like has this job, and so he's training her to do it. And then he goes missing, which is a little bit of a problem. And there's all of this stuff going on in here. It's everything with like the secret societies, with the disappearance of that. There's all of this like occult and supernatural stuff. And it's really like properly dark. This is like dark, dark, dark academia. And I know that this is like way too much for some people, but I really liked it. I love the atmosphere. I love all of the stuff that happens in it, and like all of the magic and supernatural stuff. It is like in part so disgusting and like disturbing, and yeah, I just think it's really interesting though, and I love the world that we get to see in here. It is way too much for some people, so just bear that in mind, but it does have ghosts in it along with all of this other stuff. Those were all of my recommendations though, so let's move on to my little TBR. Actually, before we do that, if any of you have any recommendations for ghost books based on like the books that I've shown you so far, I would love to know, because I do want to read more like ghost stories and books with ghosts in them. So if you have any recommendations, let me know. Anyways, first in my TBR pile, we have The 13th Tale by Diane Setterfield. And this is a book that I've wanted to read for a really long time, and it's been on my radar for like as long as I can remember. And then a little while back, I got a copy of this. I still haven't read it, but I really, really want to, because people tell me it's amazing. The story is about this writer who has spent her career writing these crazy stories, but now she's nearing the end of her life, and I think she wants to tell like the true story of her life, which seems to be like, there seems to be a lot of mystery around that. So she invites this biographer into her life, and she's gonna tell the story of her life, I guess, which is what we get to read, I'm hoping. And it seems interesting. I don't quite know what to expect from this. I do have quite high expectations because I've just heard a lot of good things. But it does mention being like Gothic. There's something about a governess and a ghost and two feral twins and a mysterious like garden and a fire. I don't really know. It seems like there's a lot going on in here, but the feral twins part is like, sounds pretty disturbing. The second book I have, I know splits opinions a little bit, but I still want to read it and give it a go. It's Mexican Gothic by Silvia Moreno-Garcia. And this is about this character who rushes to her cousin's side after having gotten this kind of disturbing letter. And she gets there, and there seems to be something like really weird about the house and all of the people in it. And I don't know what was in this letter, but I think the cousin like asks like, come save me. And yeah, I'm guessing this house is haunted. I don't know what's going on with the people in it, but I'm just assuming that's where like the ghosts come in. It is set in the Mexican countryside, which sounds like a great setting, and I don't know, I just want to give this a go. I know that some people really don't like it, but some people seem to love it, so I'm hoping I'm gonna be one of those. Then we have Gallant by V.E. Schwab, and this is a book I'm really looking forward to because I already know that I really like this author's writing, so I'm really excited to read this. The story follows this girl who's basically grown up at this all-girls school, and she's lost her family, and the only thing that she has left of her mother, I think, is like her mother's diary, and throughout that diary it seems like her mother sort of descended into madness. Then she graduates from the school, and she unexpectedly gets a letter from, I think it's an uncle. I can't tell if she knew that he was alive or not, but she gets this letter inviting her to this house, and she goes, and of course there's something weird about the house. I think there's something about alternate worlds in here, and like I have heard people refer to this as like a ghost book. I don't know if there are ghosts or monsters or what, but it seems like it's gonna be an interesting house. And I really like this author's writing, so I'm sure it's gonna be good either way. Second to last, we have The Shining by Stephen King. And I know, I probably should have read this already. I haven't even seen the movie, guys, because I am too scared to watch it. But I think that I can handle the book. I hope so. I'm sure you already know this, but this tells the story of this writer who takes a job as like a caretaker of this hotel, and I think it's during like the off season. And he brings his family there, and he's hoping that he's gonna have loads of time to write, and then of course this freaking hotel is haunted. At least that's what I'm assuming. I feel like I've sort of seen the movie just through like seeing a million clips of it, so I have some sense of what's going on in this house, but yeah, I should really just read this. It's basically a classic at this point. Lastly, we have one that seems to be a little bit lighter in tone. It's Briefly a Delicious Life by Nell Stevens. And this tells the story of a teenage girl ghost who falls in love with the writer, I think. And this girl died in like I think the 1400s in this monastery, and she's haunted it ever since, or she's, I don't know, hung out there. I don't know if she actually haunts the place. And then 400 years later or something, this writer appears and she falls in love with him. I have no idea. It sounds so weird, but I think it could be good. It sounds like it's sort of an unconventional ghost story. That was the last book though. Those were all of the books that I had to show you today. Now I'd love to hear all about your favorite ghost books, and if you have any recommendations, leave them for all of us in the comments. I would also love to hear if you've read a ghost book like at any time that really freaked you out. I may not want to read the book, but I'd love to hear like the story around it and why it was so scary. That was kind of it for today though. As always, thank you very much for hanging out with me today, and I will see you soon. Bye!